let's call the briefing meeting to order. Thanks everyone for being with us today. The items we have on our agenda for the briefing meeting, an update on Code Purple, bond preparation and criteria, affordable housing policy and criteria, and an update on the 35 Woodfin property. Are there any other items people would like to have on the agenda for the briefing meeting? All right. Are there any questions about any items on the agenda for the regular meeting at 5? All right, then we'll consider this our agenda, and the first item is the Code Purple update.
Hi, good afternoon. I believe there's a PowerPoint, but the screen's not on and I don't know what to do. Okay. Lamar, is it possible? Is it on here too or no? Sorry. Thank you so much.
Make sure that's
And
on.
just like that. Thank you so much. Hi, so I'm here to give you a quick update about Code Purple and happy to answer any questions that may come up. So we did this year, I was excited to share that we did do an advanced planning session. We started in August of this year, meeting with community partners and key stakeholders to develop a plan for Code Purple for this winter. We had representatives from Buncombe County, the city of Asheville, law enforcement from the Sheriff's Department, as well as Asheville PD. HIAC, member of representatives of HIAC, the Homelessness Initiative Advisory Committee, as well as representatives from the Homeless Coalition, which is made up of community partners of the Homeless Services Network, community paramedics, and then the providers themselves that were a part of our meetings were ABCCM, Salvation Army, the Rescue Mission, and Beloved, as well as we were excited to have Mission Hospital and Asheville Rides Transit as well as a part of our team. For many, they felt like it was actually a very inclusive planning process this year and really tried to bring the voices of those who do this work most to the table. After a couple of different meetings, this is the plan that was established. ABCCM has identified 2 locations for Code Purple. They're Veterans Restoration Quarters, which will be able to support 50 single men, as well as Transformation Village, which is going to support single women and women with children. And then they also will have hotel space available for 5 families as needed. There's also a development of a winter shelter this year that has ongoing 24/7 emergency shelter. So it's not just based on the cold nights as Code Purple has been based on. And those 2 locations are at ABCCM, that started in November at Costello House, single men that are enrolled in their program, and that will house 30 individuals. And it's important to note that individuals cannot show up at Costello House for access entry. They are to show up at the Veterans Quarters and then be able to go through the program to enter into Costello House. And the reason that that's really important is that was in partnership with the neighborhoods around Costello House, wanting to make sure that there wasn't individuals just walking through the neighborhoods, as have had some conversations in the past. And so ABCCM really heard those comments and really worked well, I think, with the neighborhood develop a plan to have entry in at the Veteran Restoration Quarters and then be able to transport individuals to Costello House. And then there's also the Asheville Ecumenical Winter Shelter that's going to start in December. And that's 4 churches. Right now, that's Trinity, Grace Episcopal, Grace Covenant, and they're working on a 4th church that'll be rotating. So in December, it will be 1 church. In January, it'll be 1 church, February, and then in March. And they anticipate being able to have 10 beds available, which will serve many of the individuals that would not be able to access services at either ABCCM, one of those 2 locations. So the Code Purple plan, it started October 15th, and pretty much right out of the gate, we actually did have a couple nights of Code Purple. So I'm really glad that we were able to have a plan in place. And it runs October 15th through April 30th. It's called on nights when temperatures are forecasted to be 32 degrees or below, and it's called 48 hours in advance, and it's called by the Homeless Coalition Chairs. The Homeless Coalition Chairs, it's a tri-chair group, so there's 3 individuals, and they get together and call Code Purple. They send out an email blast whenever there is going to be Code Purple, so everybody in the community is aware if you're signed up on the list, so you're aware of the fact that there will be Code Purple. And the county's also a part of that so that they can send information out as well. Entry time to access at ABCCM is between the hours of 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. And we had also heard historically that there were some concerns about late entries, individuals who are working, or maybe people weren't aware that it was going to be Code Purple, and as the night got colder, they decided that they actually did need services. So as you'll see there, there's late entrances accepted from the hospital, the law enforcement community, paramedics, and ABCCM, as well as some of the other provider system. Exit time at Code Purple is 7:30 a.m. the next morning, and then there's transportation provided at no cost through the services that you see listed there. So ART, ABCCM shuttles, and then community paramedics as appropriate. And so more that means is there a medical need? Have they been providing a medical need, and then does that individual need to access Code Purple? And the 2 locations for pickup for the ABCCM shuttles are between 4 and 6 at the Crisis Ministry on 24 Cumberland, at the Rescue Mission, and at Salvation Army. So there's 3 locations. So the funding for Code Purple this year actually came out of support from Buncombe County and also the city of Asheville, with an equal $50,000 per entity, for a total of $100,000. Those funds were contracted with the city of Asheville. The city of Asheville put out a request for proposals. They received proposals from 3 providers. And the HIAC Finance Committee reviewed those proposals, made recommendations, and then on 10/28, those recommendations were brought to HIAC. The HIAC committee voted, approved the proposals. You'll see in just a moment what they were. And the city of Asheville staff will execute those contracts. Here is the list of funding allocations that were the funding request, as then the recommendation that was made by the committee. The one I want to make sure to mention is Salvation Army at the bottom. You may have seen or heard that before. I didn't mention Salvation Army is one of our sites. Unfortunately, they had originally planned to be able to do Code Purple, but due to staff capacity, they are not able to do that after the allocation decision had come out. So those funds will be reallocated amongst the providers listed above, and that conversation will occur at the November 30th HIAC meeting. The allocation amount was done through an equitable distribution based on funding amount requested. So this is Code Purple in action, kind of what's happened since it actually was called again today. But whenever this presentation was made, there were 2 nights in October. There was an after-action meeting to address some questions that had arisen after the last Code Purple. So we originally had entry times at the Code Purple locations from 4 to 6. After conversation, it's now been extended till 8. There was transportation access questions about is there transportation to and from locations, so those pieces got addressed. Medical clearance, there had been some questions that had come up from that. And so I think that after-action meeting really was able to have solutions to some of the questions that had been raised after those first 2 nights. The key takeaways from our Code Purple plan this year so far is we do have more Code Purple beds this year than last year. So we have 105 beds available this year versus the 78 that we had last year. Code Purple manual was released I think it was on Friday. The Code Purple manual got released by the Homeless Coalition, and that has detailed guidance about what providers are to do and how the system works. We have a coordinating team that will continue to meet and evaluate the plan, address any issues or concerns as they arise. And then, of course, we have the upcoming report from the National Alliance to End Homelessness on unsheltered homelessness coming in January. That take me to discussion.
Would you go back and briefly touch on the winter shelter, so the board understands the difference between that and the Code Purple?
The winter shelter? Yes. So the winter shelter, so there had been some conversation about whether or not a winter shelter was necessary or whether Code Purple would meet that need. So there were ABCCM and the ecumenical community came up and said they would like to do a winter shelter. And so they felt like they wanted to run that 24/7 regardless of the cold weather nights because while Code Purple's called at 32 degrees, 33 degrees is also still quite cold. And so for some, they felt like that was a need in our community. And so ABCCM decided for 2 of their locations to have just the Code Purple location, and then for that third location to be able to offer a winter shelter. And then the Ecumenical Church group also wanted to offer that winter shelter as well.
I'll just say thank you for the update, and it's very positive the responsiveness to the community that you've taken that feedback and you're utilizing that with this plan. Thank you.
Out of curiosity, so what are the facilities that are listed here? Are they used for like housing for the homeless outside of the winter time, or are they just sort of deployed during this Code Purple season or Code Purple nights?
No, so many are already functioning as shelters during the regular part of the year, but they don't have as much space throughout the year to offer beds. So like their cots right now is what has been set up. And so oftentimes you have more people in smaller spaces whenever it's Code Purple nights. And one of the things that you may recall when COVID first hit was really impactful because we couldn't have people as close together. So the social distancing piece.
Okay. And so there's more bed capacity now than last year. And is it the assessment of the folks who've been involved in planning this that this is an adequate number to meet the need for this winter?
We believe so at this time. The first 2 nights of Code Purple we did not max out at capacity, which is great. We still have some capacity in those both of those locations. And then as well, once the ecumenical churches start, there'll be even more capacity that we don't have currently.
All right, thank you for the update, appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, the next item is the bond preparation and criteria. And then following this, we'll have a discussion around some affordable housing policy and criteria, and Matt Cable's gonna help us out with both these items.
Good afternoon. So I am stepping in for Sybil Tate to present the information on the general obligation bonds and provide an update. So I will do my best to provide you all the information and answer questions with the support of other staff as necessary. So next steps in terms of moving forward with regard to the general obligation bond. The first step, and these are activities that are going to be happening in the coming weeks and months, is the hiring of the 2 bond project managers. We anticipate to begin advertising for those positions within the week and hope for a start date in February for both of those positions. The primary duties of those positions would be in project management, financial reporting. They would be involved in presenting to the Community Oversight Committee, the board, as well as any advisory boards that have pertinent advisement capacity in those decisions, as well as maintaining the transparency website. At the same time, as was just mentioned, the board is going to begin reviewing and approving project selection criteria. The first item is listed here under the affordable housing category. As was mentioned, I'll be presenting on the criteria that has regularly been used by the board to disseminate the Affordable Housing Services Program funding over the last nearly 20 years, with updates, obviously. So the Affordable Housing Committee has reviewed those criteria. I'll go through those various updates that the committee is recommending, but that would be presented tonight, and then we'll come back in early December for the board's approval of those final criteria and program guidelines. With regard to the open space, there are kind of 3 sets of criteria that will need to be developed and finalized. The first, for conservation easements, there are some draft criteria that we hope to bring back to the board on December 5th at the briefing, I believe, and then again bring that forward to the full board for approval. The criteria for greenways and passive recreation, which I'll make a little bit of clarification on that, we're anticipating coming forward in February to the board for consideration. We are using the term passive recreation internally to kind of differentiate that from the whole of the open space bond and to provide some clarity in terms of, it's very similar to the way that open space has been defined, but using a different term so that it was distinct from the entirety of the bond. And then also kind of running along that same path and time frame is the selection of the Community Oversight Committee. CAPE is actively advertising and promoting in order to get applicants, and as soon as there are enough applicants submitted, Lamar will be bringing that forward through the board for process to select the committee members. And that is all I have, unless you have questions. As I said, I will try to answer what I can and defer to others as necessary.
So we're looking for folks to serve on the Oversight Committee. So people of Buncombe County, we call upon you to serve on this committee. So we're looking for one person who's got a background in accounting, one person with a background in banking or finance, one person who has a background in, one person who's a representative from the Chamber of Commerce, one person with a background in affordable housing, and one person with a background in either conservation or greenway-related interests. So we're taking applications now, so anybody who's interested in that, we would, you can go to the county website, and we would love to have you submit to apply to serve on this oversight board. Any other questions about, or any questions about the process moving forward? All right. You want to keep going, Matt?
Sure. So the next item that I'll be presenting is the Affordable Housing Services Program description, requirements, and guidelines. I'll wait for that presentation to pull up. But as it's coming up, as a reminder, and as I just kind of referenced previously, the Buncombe County has offered an affordable housing services program and funding to support affordable housing activities since 2004. There has been program guidance that has existed so that we can communicate what activities we want to support, as well as indicate who's eligible to apply and seek that funding support. So that's been in place for a number of years. The Affordable Housing Committee in its capacity reviews those program guidelines and makes recommendations for modification. And what we're doing now is bringing that information to you about what those recommendations are, providing a copy of that draft program guidance so that you're prepared then to consider adoption in early December. So the existing Affordable Housing Services Program supported activities include a construction loan program, down payment assistance program, tenant-based rental assistance program, the construction grant program for non-revenue generating properties, the emergency repair grant program, and the New Start program. You'll notice at the bottom of this list in italics is an administrative support program. So this is a new category that the committee is recommending we add to the program, obviously with board approval. So a little bit of details about the Affordable Housing Committee's recommended modifications to the program. The first kind of, and we're highlighting the more significant modifications here. The first is just clarifying that rehabilitation of existing affordable housing is an eligible activity for a construction loan. We are in Buncombe County going to begin seeing some of our existing affordable housing multifamily unit stock kind of reach the end of its life, where it would be tied to remaining in affordable housing. So this provides those property owners the ability to access funds in order to rehab and keep those properties in affordability. The second modification is to the emergency repair program. In recognition of the increasing cost of all things, including construction and repair work, the committee is recommending to increase the maximum per home investment to $25,000. To increase when a lien is required to repairs that exceed $15,000, and to reduce the period of impact on a lien to a maximum of 3 years. Again, this is reflecting those increased costs to perform a repair on properties. The New Start program, currently the maximum award is $25,000. We have seen a number of entities utilize that to undertake new activities. In recognition, again, of increasing costs and the need for impact in those areas in order to meet The board adopted affordable housing goals. The committee is recommending to increase that award to $50,000 per award. And as I mentioned before, the new category or new program offering would be the administrative support program. This would be a grant program, and this was really developed based on community partner feedback. Staff hosted a community partner meeting in September and received feedback from a number of organizations doing work in the affordable housing area. And they were having concerns about inability to access administrative funds. Those funds could help, again, advance very specific and targeted county goals. So they would be attached to, if that funding is sought and requested, that they would need to advance the identified goals, again, a maximum award of $50,000. So that would be a new program category in this cycle. So the existing criteria, those that would be used for the Affordable Housing Services Program, and we would anticipate being able to utilize this program to dispense bond funds as well. So those existing criteria are meeting the affordable housing goals and objectives, again, those which the board adopted earlier this year. We also look at funding constraints, individual project merits. What is the project? How is it composed? Who does it serve? The achievement of a desired mix of project types. There are varied goals in terms of rental housing, homeownership, repair, so making sure we're achieving a desired mix. Leveraging other funding, that's a critical component. We're typically a gap funder, so we are relying on our partners to leverage other funds to make the projects viable, and then also voucher acceptance, another specific goal that the board recently adopted. There are some clarifying pieces of information. So in practice, we have been undertaking a lot of this work, but we wanted to provide that clarification in writing as part of the guidance, and then this again coming through the committee and their recommendation. So the Board of Commissioners, it's just specifying again in the guidance that the board would continue to budget general fund dollars and allocate the funds to the projects through the annual budgeting process. There was a provision. Currently, you are prohibited from seeking a property tax exemption if you accept one of our construction loans. There was discussion about that being potentially having a negative impact on certain projects, making them less viable. So it was recommended by the committee that the board have the authority to waive that prohibition, so basically to allow applicants to seek that property tax exemption if it was necessary for project viability. Clarifying the role of the Affordable Housing Committee, reviewing the project applications, recommending the funding allocations to the full board, and then recommending contract terms in terms of loan interest rates as well as deferral of loans. And then clarifying the role of the Community Development Division, being that to administer the funds, to contract with the partners, including finalizing the scope of the contracts, the lien position, and other less significant details, but still important details. And then monitoring and closing out projects. So the next steps, as I mentioned earlier, the Board of Commissioners considering adoption of the committee recommended Affordable Housing Services Program. That would allow us to move forward with the request for proposals on December 12th. Applications would be due on February 10th, and the committee would begin its process of review and recommendation so that we can ultimately bring that back to the board through the budgeting process. I am happy to answer any questions that you have. We did provide, as I mentioned, a copy of the current draft recommended program description, guidelines, and requirements.
I have a couple of questions. So when, I don't recall seeing anything, I glanced at the other information you provided, but do we have anything that specifies how long the projects have to be affordable, the housing has to be affordable when we do rentals?
So for multifamilies, it's for the term of the loan generally. They can propose a longer term period in terms of affordability. And typically other funders are actually requiring a longer period of affordability than our loan runs. So for our multifamily projects, in practicality, it's a 20-year guarantee of affordability. They can propose higher. If they do, we can write that into the contract. But for example, a tax credit project would have a more extensive period of affordability than that. So typically, we are the least restrictive in terms of the affordability period, but they will be affordable for a longer period of time.
Okay, thank you. And I think I saw somewhere in there that these funds cannot be used, it has to be for 80% AMI and under, right? It cannot be for that 80 to 120.
Correct.
And can you just clarify why that is?
Sure. So we rely on general statutes to give us the authority to provide that support. And general statutes do limit our activities to serving low and moderate income households, which are defined at that threshold of 80% or less.
Okay, thank you. And then I think just one final question. With the emergency repair, with our ability to do that program, it seems like from what I'm hearing from the community, there's a significant need in that area pertaining to affordable housing. So are we going to be able to ramp that up and do quite a bit more with that this next go-around? It looks like in December is when you have your request for proposals.
A lot of our response to the emergency repair need is really driven by the applicants. We have historically, over the last several years, significantly increased our activity in emergency repair. The requests have significantly increased from year to year. We were unable to, with last year's general fund allocation, to meet the full request of potential activity. But I would anticipate, again, depending on project merits and the mix of project types, as well as the use of general funds and bond funds, the potential to be able to do more work in that area.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions? I have just maybe a couple questions or comments. Matt, can you remind me, you mentioned the liens on the home repair projects. What's the threshold again for when the liens would be required? It's over what amount?
It's over 15,000.
It's over 15, then the property owner would need to place a lien have a lien placed on the property, and the maximum investment is 25,000 per property.
Correct.
Yeah, and this is a new requirement that we would be creating.
It's actually expanding our existing cap. So up until this round or this proposed set of guidance, that cap had been at 15,000 maximum investment per unit and 10,000, at which point the lien would kick in.
Yeah.
And be in place.
Okay, so we've had the lien requirement for a long, long time.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. And I know we talked about this a little bit at the committee meeting, so I won't belabor too much here, but is it the perspective of the staff that are there a lot of property owners who would choose to do it the smaller amount to avoid the lien, and just kind of what's the kind of reaction from property owners around, some people have no problem with that, but I understand that people might be, I don't know, have concerns about it for whatever reasons.
So there were a number of reasons we discussed modifying those caps and setting a higher lien. What we were finding, because our contracted providers, which traditionally have been Habitat for Humanity and Mountain Housing Opportunities, are regularly submitting requests for support right under that cap where the lien would come into place, because they are utilizing a number of funding sources. What they were reporting to us is the lien is a hindrance to certain applicants for seeking out the emergency repair. So we were trying to remove some barriers there for them. And then they're cobbling together kind of several pieces of funding in order to keep them from receiving a lien on the property. There are a number of reasons for that. Again, this is anecdotal from our partners and things that we learned through the meeting that we had in September. But if you think of particularly older adults in our community, oftentimes, at that age, thinking about inheritance and passing on additional debt is not something that they're really desiring to do. So they may choose or forego seeking out a repair in order not to encumber their child or someone else with that.
In terms of the liens being placed, is that something that are Habitat or Mountain Housing, they have to do that work, or is that something that Buncombe County legal or staff are involved in placement of the lien, the transaction of that?
So the liens are currently executed by the provider themselves. So they actually issue the lien and they hold them. If they do expend more than the cap, right, so that the lien is required, we require proof that the lien has been placed so that they can recapture that income and redeploy it.
All right, well, I'm I'm not objecting to it. I'm okay with it. I guess I would just flag it as one of these things where I think the question is like whether the benefit of it is worth the effort that goes into it, right? You know, because it is kind of a, it's not real complicated, but there's a legal process there, and does it create some barriers? So I guess I would just raise it as an item that's kind of worth continuing to look at. You know, is the benefit of, the concern, right, is someone takes taxpayer money, fixes up a property, and then flips it, right, and just makes like a little bit of a windfall profit on it. So that's the problem we're trying to solve, right? And I guess I just wonder through, my sense from how like Habitat and Mountain Housing go about their process is that they probably have a pretty good sense that that's like super unlikely with the folks they're working with. So I guess I just kind of wonder if it's makes sense in theory, but is it really needed? I guess is the question that I kind of keep wondering to myself. So I guess I would ask that we maybe just kind of continue to evaluate and see if it's if the benefit's worth the extra work involved in it. And then on the property tax exemption policy, so the recommendation is that the Affordable Housing Committee could have the option of allowing an affordable housing developer to gain a property tax exemption, even if they're also accepting like a low-interest loan from the county. Whereas our current policy is, if you accept a low-interest loan, don't come asking for a property tax exemption. But it's totally at our discretion whether to do that or not. It would simply give us that option to consider.
Correct, right. Right now, there is no option, but we wanted to provide the option, for the board to make that decision. One reason that property tax exemption, seeking that out, was prohibited is that that's a source of kind of revenue to offset the expense of a loan that's not necessarily being paid back except through cash flow and some other things. From a practical standpoint, when we evaluate kind of a loan when it gets to the end of the term, we're going to look at property tax payments as well as cash flow payments that were made and say, over the course of this loan, this is kind of where revenues have been generated for the county in order to cover that cost. It's particularly important in a principal balloon situation where they're holding a lot of debt that will come due all at once, which is fairly typical in a tax credit project. But in some cases, as we've seen, prohibiting that could be infringing upon the ultimate delivery of the project. So I'm looking at those kinds of details.
Okay, and under state law, like if a developer builds a project and it's all affordable, but they don't ask for any public funding from the town or county that they're in, they would be granted the property tax exemption under state law. That's kind of a state policy to encourage affordable housing, right?
Right, so there are general statutes that give them the opportunity to make application for that. And if they meet the criteria, that they're providing the affordable housing, then they would be able to have that exemption. What we have done is practically prohibit them from seeking out something they were able to ask for, but they're accepting that in order to receive the benefit of the loan.
All right.
Can you speak more from the Affordable Housing Committee standpoint, why you are wanting to make that change? Like, are there some specific things that have come up that brought this change forth?
Well, we just had some discussion about it at the last meeting, so it's not been like a long-term conversation. I think part of the concern is just, we're in this era. The bonds have passed, great news. That's more resources to invest in, this area. But we're looking at really high interest rates for people who want to build housing or apartments and things like that, and construction costs are up. So I think part of the concern is just that the economics of getting projects done is like we're in this, hopefully not long-term, but in the near term, we're in this environment that's going to be really hard. So I think the reason it kind of came up was, do we need to look at some of the things we're doing for these new construction projects to make sure that they'll be viable? And so I think, at least for myself, I was actually just trying to understand what is the current policy, because I was kind of unclear on like, do only nonprofits get it or does everybody get it? And so I do think we'll need to be kind of careful though, and maybe the committee needs to spend some more time thinking about it, because the property tax abatement is a big benefit, right? Like financially, like it's a pretty powerful thing. So I think we do want to be careful that if we're not planning on doing that, or at least not doing that very often, that we don't want to send the signal that you can kind of, hey, the option's there, and then people kind of start expecting to get it when in fact we may not be planning to give it, or only in the rarest of circumstances or something like that. So I'm wondering if maybe we need to come up with a more clear expectation for is this like a very rare exception or more of a normal thing that we might consider? But we really haven't gotten it. You're just saying it's something that we could talk about. We haven't come
Right.
up with a plan, really.
And I would say, from staff's perspective, in advising the committee and advising the board, what we would look at is their pro forma, and is it necessary for project viability? That's the lens through which we look at the loan offerings as well. The way that property taxes feed into the pro forma, which is how you determine whether the project is viable, to begin with, do they have enough revenue to cover their expenses? It creates an expense that causes issues with debt service coverage ratio. So if you can reduce the expense on one side, it gives them more financing capacity potentially. But as has been the case, if they're seeking specific loan terms, or if they're presenting a pro forma that would show, a property tax exemption, for example, they're going to need to illustrate that. And then we would need to be able to confirm in the pro forma that it is necessary. And that would be what staff would provide as terms of information, as whether that appears to be necessary based on the pro forma provided.
I mean, I guess I wonder, this is part of why we have a committee, so and we could talk more about some of these detailed stuff there, but, in some ways it seems like maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we should just kind of keep it the way we had, so that it's like all apples to apples, right? Like everybody pays property taxes. If you need more money to get your project viable, you need to just ask for more money, like based on the particular environment we're in. It may just be that some additional, larger investments may be needed than they were in the past, but I think what we don't want to get into is kind of giving half the people a tax break and the other half not. And it's everybody's going to say they're needed. I can just guarantee you, everybody's going to say they need it. If we say it's an option, all of a sudden, everybody needs it. So, I don't know. It may be we just need to spend some more time on this to kind of come up with a consistent approach on it. But I don't hear this commits us to a particular path. It just kind of says we have some space to consider it, but I don't know. Do you, Amanda or Parker, do y'all have any thoughts on this, or Amanda or Avril?
To your point, we haven't really gotten into it and studied it, but we are planning on bringing back an item to you on December 5th for a vote. So maybe we can remove that until you study it, and then we can bring that back later after you've fully fleshed it out.
Just keep the current policy for now. I think that makes sense too. All right. Great. Well, those are my only comments. Any other questions or comments on the presentation?
Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Okay. The last item on the briefing agenda is the 35 Woodfin Advanced Planning Update. And I think Scott Metcalf and Paulina Mendez are here to update us on this item.
Good afternoon, Chairman Newman, Commissioners. I want to thank you for allowing us this time to provide an update on our progress for the 35 Woodfin Advanced Planning Project. First off, I want to say thanks to Assistant County Managers D.K. Wesley and Sybil Tate for helping facilitate the many meetings it took to get to where we're at. I would also like to thank the Family Justice Center staff, Tiffany Ihanacho and Paulina Mendez, and the many FJC partners that helped us get here. I originally approached this project as a move management project, just not really knowing who did what, just, I'm planning to move folks from A to B. And it wasn't until we started meeting with folks that you realize the sensitivity and complexity of the services that the FJC provides. Since our original kickoff meeting, we had three core questions to answer. And that was, can the FJC coexist with forward-facing departments? Who could those departments be? And what does that look like? We've had over 50 meetings with various staff, just over a year to answer these three questions. With the help of the FJC partners' input, we've answered the question and we've come to the conclusion that yes, we can coexist. We've come a long way from where we first started, and we've really begun to make progress on something that will not only improve citizen access to most forward-facing departments, but also improve services and increase the footprint of the Family Justice Center. Here with us today to provide more detail is Rachel Nielsen and Katie McGrary from CPO Architects, who we can accredit to keeping us on track and answering our questions and navigating our logistical obstacles through architectural design. Rachel.
Thank you, and thanks for letting me present to you this afternoon. I'm going to back up a little bit from what Scott took you through and give a little bit of background of how we got here and how we got to this project that we're talking about. We have presented last year and the year before about the Buncombe County Comprehensive Facility Master Plan, and through that process, looked at capital planning and projects for the next 15 years for the county. Through that, one of the outcomes of that was that through your change in your telecommute and remote work policies and discussions on who and how many people were remote working, and through department and facility assessments, we found that the 40 Cox building had a number of vacancies, and in order to fully utilize that building, a number of HHS staff and departments were planned to be relocated from 35 Woodfin to 40 Cox. That left vacancies at 35 Woodfin. And with the location of the building in the downtown area, prime downtown property, and also a desire to create a facility for forward-facing services to all coexist in one place, to better increase efficiencies, provide a central space for public services for people to come to, we looked at 35 Woodfin as a possibility for that. And that led to this project here. As Scott mentioned, we've had a number of meetings through this process. We've gone through a lot of programming meetings, not just with the Family Justice Center, but with a lot of these other departments, these forward-facing service departments that I'll go through kind of who that list is later. Talking about what their space needs are, what everyone's space needs are, what growth looks like for each of these different groups, what access looks like, and how some of these spaces need to work in terms of adjacencies and efficiencies with each other in terms of central lobbies or separate spaces. We've also talked through access to these different departments, how many visitors each of them have a day, and what traffic might look like and what parking needs might look like. So we've developed a program of spaces for each of these departments. We've also gone through 4 in-depth charrettes with the Family Justice Center to talk specifically about what some of those concerns are, specifically as they relate to survivors and victims and their needs for access, for security, for safety, to make sure that we aren't prohibiting access for any of those people, keeping their needs kind of at the forefront of how we looked at what this space is. Those charrettes those 4 charrettes were in person. We had small group discussions. We had large group meetings. We looked at we did some live drawing and talked through kind of what these look like from a visual perspective, and then also did have a survey where we are able to go through with all of the partners and help understand some of the prioritization of all of these different elements and these different needs that we were talking about. To note a few of those, a couple of those were for FJC spaces to all be located on one floor, to not kind of split up how that FJC as a whole was. For Law Enforcement Special Victims Unit, which is currently co-located with FJC in 35 Woodfin, to be on the same level as the FJC to better provide those security needs. For the front door to FJC to face the Woodfin parking lot, there are concerns from survivors and victims about safety and security in a parking deck situation. And so that open lot was something that was discussed. And for there to be separate street addresses. And we have talked with Buncombe County, with the city of Asheville, about the possibility of having separate entrances and a separate address so there's no confusion about who goes where. And then access to the courthouse from the College Street end of the building. So the FJC, the Family Justice Center, is helping a lot of survivors and victims to get services at the courthouse. And so there is a lot of people coming to the FJC Center and then walking over to the courthouse from that building to go get and to go meet with people. Our findings for the charrette, first on the department side, we talked about a number of more departments that are forward-facing service departments than this, and these were the ones that were kind of the primary forward-facing service departments that the county had a goal to locate together. And also, a number of these departments are currently in facilities that had been flagged on the comprehensive facility master plan on the building assessment side as buildings that either are penned for different uses or need significant upgrades. So these were, a lot of these, or most of these were departments that kind of needed a new home per se. These departments, tax collection, tax assessment, planning, permits and inspections, air quality, environmental health, backup 911, and IT are the ones that we've been centering this conversation around as departments that would be co-located at this facility. And they do have a variety of visitors counts to each of these. A number of them are in the kind of 20 to 40 a day, and it kind of varies per day. Tax collection is by far the highest. And that's primarily within the about 3-month tax season period, but there can be a few hundred people that are coming per day during that time. From findings through the charrettes, through the survey, it was really important, kind of I'm putting under this, required needs for there not to be a cross-mingling. So making sure that FJC and these forward-facing departments do not have a central lobby from a security standpoint, that those two are two separate items. All of our conversations through the charrette and through the design process were framed around the fact that the FJC location, the plan, and these discussions were contingent upon nothing in that parking lot right in the front in the future. If something was planned for that in the future, that would change the discussions that were had. And that was for a few reasons. One, from a parking need perspective from the FJC side for those survivors and those victims. From the other departments, some of those other departments, contractor parking that typically have trucks that aren't going to fit in a parking deck, ADA parking that wants to be closer to the front of a building, things like that. As well as with a forward-facing services building, understanding that there's a need for that to be visible as well. Separate entrances required. Separate address numbers were preferred, and we believe from discussions that that is possible. The area designated as FJC also includes law enforcement, and that would remain in the future. From a preferred needs perspective, we understand there will be a need for parking lot security. What that need is and what it looks like is still to be determined. One thing that was discussed was having a parking arm. That way, at the one of the Woodfin entry drives for the FJC parking specifically. That way, there is a separation from a security standpoint. And then a square footage increase for the FJC, which would be growth for their current partners according to the services that they currently provide. From an FJC visitor perspective, since I did mention the other ones as well, understanding is that from October 2020 to September 2021, they saw about 2,600, served about 2,600 survivors, plus another 5 to 7 a day through Mountain Child Advocacy. And so that kind of is in the range of like 10 to 20 a day, including Mountain Child Advocacy. With potential for higher per day when there are group meetings or group sessions that happen as well. I have on here options A and B. If you've seen, if you saw the number of options that we've actually worked through at these charrettes, it's much, much higher than that. But we've come to a lot of consensus through the charrette process. Options A and B are actually very, very similar. There's just a couple of differences, and from our understanding, there isn't necessarily a preference between those at the point we are in our discussions. Just to note some of those differences, we are showing a secondary entrance on this plan for both FJC as well as a secondary entrance for other departments. And the secondary entrance in one for FJC is on the College Street end of the building by the playground that's over there. And in the other option, that secondary entrance is in the area between the parking deck and the building, so kind of down where that sidewalk goes. In option A, there is direct access from FJC to the playground area. In option B, it's not direct access, but there would be access through the end of the building and then out to the playground. In option A, there will be a new stair requirement at the College Street end of the building, just because in both options, FJC is located on the second level of the building, or if you're looking at it from where we are here, it actually will look like the third level. And then that lobby. And so, like I mentioned, from a similarity perspective, FJC is on that second level in both options. Parking for FJC out at the surface lot on Woodfin. In both options, there is still going to be a need for renovation to what we are assuming is about 2.5 floors of the building. We have not gone through full programming and full schematic design to see what walls may remain as existing, how we may renovate. And then there are, again, separate entrances for both other departments and for FJC. So running through each of these floors, this is floor 0. Half of this floor is a below ground basement. The other half of this floor that's closer to this building does have windows on one side of it. And this floor has mechanical space, a lot of mechanical space, houses emergency services, is a possible future backup 911, and then has options for other forward-facing department use. More likely storage spaces, labs for air quality, things like that are not necessarily public serving spaces. And again, this is the same plan in both A and B, with the exception of an added stair. For floor 1, these are the comparisons of A and B. Like I mentioned, they're pretty similar. FJC is the green spaces, and then other departments are those purple spaces. That we are proposing through this a few new elevators throughout the building to better access the spaces, and also the College Street parking deck only has an elevator on one side of it, and so the other side of it closer to Woodfin Street, we are proposing and adding an elevator there to better access those. Yeah.
sorry, can I interrupt while we have the maps at their largest? The red line that's running north and south through the parking lot back to the building, what purpose does that serve?
That's just a graphic indication that that parking lot would serve some other department parking and some FJC parking.
Okay, it's depicting.
It's
split parking.
depicting like
Okay.
a separation,
Okay.
but we have not fully flushed out where that line goes, what that separation looks like, or anything like that.
Gotcha.
Flesh that out, so you haven't determined like how many spaces would be in the two different areas?
No. So we know, let's see. We know from an FJC standpoint that they are seeing that kind of 10 to 20 a day with a high of about 40 a day. And the partners currently park in that front parking lot. They are not Buncombe County staff, so they don't currently have access to the parking deck. But that could be something that could happen. They could park in there, and then that would change needs for that FJC parking. And then from the other department parking, we know that there are some departments that have those needs, from the contractor truck parking and from the ADA parking. But we would need, and we are proposing a boardroom here for planning and stuff, so we know that there will be larger groups that need to come here from that perspective, which would require some parking as well.
And who was required, the boardroom?
The planning department.
And what kind of trucks can't park in the parking deck? Just really large trucks? I mean, like a typical truck, and like I park my truck in the decks all the time, so.
Yeah,
Some kind of like really large truck or something.
probably really large trucks, yeah. Lifted trucks, I don't know. And then that red square down on the bottom part of the plan is designating about 10 spaces for FJC. Those are not for staff. That would be primarily for Mountain Child Advocacy clients, because the Mountain Child Advocacy entrance is discussed to be that end of the building. And then on the second level,
And,
Yep.
That's, keep on.
sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay. On the second level, again, the green is that FJC. It's hard to tell that it's hatched, but the mostly purple area there is other departments primarily. That's where we discussed putting conference rooms, the boardroom. That way, any conference spaces that are there could potentially be shared with FJC. There are no large conference rooms, training rooms planned in that FJC program. To summarize the proposed building changes, again, option A indicates a second entrance for FJC at College Street, a new stair at that secondary entrance, lobby space on the ground level, playground access from the building. Option B has that secondary entrance at the walkway at the parking lot. From a building-wide perspective, like I mentioned, there are 3 new elevators that are proposed. One at the parking deck, one at the new FJC entry to lead you direct to a second floor, and another one at the left side of the building. There are currently 2 elevators within the building right now, one at the center, one all the way down at College Street. 0 to 1 new stairs, depending on the plan. Renovated entry for FJC to go straight to the second floor. New entry for other departments. Full interior renovation, and compliance with the Buncombe County High Performance Building Resolution and 100% renewable energy plans. So we have done preliminary energy analysis to understand what some of that might be and what might mean for this renovation. From the parking perspective, FJC parking at that front surface lot, automated parking arm at the FJC lot entry, other department parking at the front surface lot to include ADA and truck contractor parking, and then the 10 spaces at the lower level. And so where we are right now is, as Scott mentioned, we have had a number of charrettes. We've had a number of meetings with the different departments to understand program. The next steps would be to have further discussions with the other departments, to bring them into these charrette discussions, to make sure that we fully validated their program needs and made sure that we've included all of the growth numbers. Our meetings with them were a little over a year ago, so we want to make sure that we're still on track with what we heard then. And to get your feedback prior to moving forward with any additional meetings or design decisions.
All right. Questions, comments?
And commissioners, as you're thinking about your questions, also remember that we are working with DFI on what would that study look like. That is due back in February. So we don't have all the details of that today to include in this conversation.
Okay, so that's my question. So we're actually not making any decisions now. We're waiting till February till we get that back from DFI and then have a discussion. Is that?
That would be my recommendation, to have all
Okay.
the pieces.
And we're also going to be doing additional analysis on the utilization of the county's very large parking garage, which is next to this surface parking lot, right? Because when we were talking about the parking for downtown workers issue, we're starting that at Cox Avenue. You know, this garage is a potential interest, but we hadn't really done the analysis yet to know, like, is there capacity here for some downtown workforce parking, which may be a good idea, or, you know, might we some of the staff who work in the building, could they potentially work there, either county employees or FJC partner organizations? Could their staff park there? Because right now they're just all using the surface parking lot, right?
That's my understanding from the FJC perspective, and I believe when HHS was in there that some of them were using surface and some of them were using the deck.
Okay.
And I also understand that there are a lot of people parking in that lot that are not associated with any of those things right now, so.
They're just people who want to go downtown who are parking there, and
Like,
we're not being super mean and towing them off like everybody else is, so it's just happening a bit. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised by that. All right, sounds good. You know, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, you know, we're looking at all these downtown properties for what's their highest and best use for the future. I mean, I think there's a lot of, you know, good thinking that's gone into this. And, you know, my only kind of reticence is, as we think about growth and development, the need for affordable housing, you know, one of our biggest constraints is that we just don't have much land to do it on, right? Because we live in these beautiful mountains where there's not a lot of buildable property. So when we have, you know, acres of downtown surface parking that's owned by the county, then obviously we want to make sure we're not underutilizing it. And I totally get the need for, like, the clients of the Family Justice Center to have this place that's very easy to park, feels safe, you know, so preserving that capacity, I think certainly, you know, that's very important. But does that mean we have to kind of keep this whole, you know, this kind of the status quo in terms of the surface parking lot as it appears today, you know, for forever? I don't know if that's what makes the most sense. So those are some of the kind of questions I hope we can think a little bit more about before making the final decisions. Other questions or thoughts from commissioners?
So when DFI comes back to us in February, so they're going to have looked at these various county properties, and this is one of them, and come forward with some recommendations?
Yes, that's the deliverables that we ask them to do, to look at all their properties, the Cox Avenue parking lot, this parking lot, and I don't believe Valley Street is on that list yet because it's occupied, but those two parking lots for sure, they're going to be looking at and bring us back. In my mind, a timeline, which one could go first is more ready for development, and then the second one, when would that timeline look like? So it could be several years before we get to 35 Woodfin, or it could be more recent. We don't know.
Okay.
And one of the other questions, and, you know, if the information's not like, you know, something that can be responded to right away, one of the other questions I had is about the frequency of folks who are visiting Family Justice Center who are also utilizing the courthouse on the same trip. Like, so would park in that parking space, utilize FJC, and then go to the courthouse for some purpose. Like, how often that is, like what kind of percentage of the clients who are served kind of combine those trips and things like that. That's one of the other questions I've had. And I don't know if there's any data on that, but that was just a question I had.
Yeah,
Is
so
that
the
something that's like very
information-
common or happens but isn't, you know, that common, that kind of thing?
The information from Paulina is that it's about 50 to 60% of the people coming are served at FJC in the courthouse in the same day.
Okay. All right.
Right, I just want to take a moment to pile on in agreement with what you said about surface parking and that mapped image we saw. There's just several acres of surface parking just burning a hole in the tax rolls of Asheville and Buncombe County, and we're not utilizing our space very well in our community. We're running out of space.
All right. Any other questions or thoughts for now?
So can I think outside the box real quickly?
Yes.
One of the things that I heard Rachel said was coming from the charrette was around front-facing buildings want to be seen from the street. So maybe we can entertain tearing the building down and using all of it. Just my wish list.
So, do you mean as a short-term proposition or a long-term proposition?
As a long-term proposition, if you're thinking affordable housing on the parking lot, instead of building in the parking lot and have the building hidden from the street, maybe we use the parking lot to build a brand-new facility that has everything we need and housing on the top floors, and use the whole footprint of the property.
I mean, I think that's really interesting. I mean, for the downtown that we have today, the building that's built there today is not what would be built there today if you had a clean slate, right? It's a very suburban design, you know, frankly, not the highest. It wasn't really built to be like a long enduring building is my sense of it. So, but, I mean, anyway, I would just say I'd be open to exploring such ideas either whenever that might make sense. I mean, obviously you don't want to spend a ton of money and then immediately turn around and like build something new, but I think it's a really interesting idea for thinking about.
We'll add it to DFI's list.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Anything else for now? All right. Thank you so much for the updates and for everybody's work around this whole planning process. We really appreciate all the dialogue and everyone coming together to think about the future.
Thank you.
Our agenda for the briefing meeting, so we're adjourned and we'll resume at 5 o'clock.